After watching the new Spanish Netflix mystery Alma, or The Girl in the Mirror, there is no way in the world I'm ever going on a bus ride. After losing her memory in a bizarre accident that kills most of her classmates, Alma tries to unravel what happened that day and regain her identity. This Spanish series follows Alma and some of her friends after they survive a terrible accident during a high school trip. Now, Alma wakes up with zero memories, and while she's trying to recover who she is, bad things begin to happen to those around her. This is a supernatural mystery with some attempts at diving into the horror genre as well. Now, this is a 9-episode first season, with the majority of the episodes sitting in that mid 40-minute range, and then the final 2 episodes being closer to an hour long. This is not a quick binge in the slightest, and as intriguing as the story is, it's also not an easy binge session either. The first half gives us some character details and background, but it also spends a decent amount of time introducing us to the lore that the story rests upon. But the odd thing is that while we get some introductions to the belief systems and the mythology of the plot, they're kind of forgotten for several episodes, barely even mentioned or addressed. Now, once we get to the latter half of the series, that's when the show kind of remembers that it was built around some supernatural goings-on and then begins to revisit them, allowing them to drive the narrative. Now, the beginning of the show is great and messed up with suspense and some horrifying scenes, which then create a big air of excitement and intrigue. Then the next 2 to maybe 4 episodes drag out the show, progressing us very, very slowly through the storytelling. These really could have been trimmed to give us more efficient pacing, but during this, I don't want the character backgrounds or even the lore introduction to be rushed. And I also don't want the series to linger in areas that become repetitive, and there are a lot of those. Sometimes scenes repeat action for action, and that becomes tedious and tired. It's especially hard to endure when the characters are angsty and the storyline becomes convoluted. Now, the repetition doesn't help clarify or streamline the narrative, it just complicates it unnecessarily. And that really is a shame because some of the twists are enjoyable and they build out a lot of the intrigue for the mystery. Now, I think along the way in this, the show loses the plot. We continue to follow Alma amongst a bunch of other characters as they are all being affected in one way or another by the mysterious and or supernatural elements that are within the story. But when this shifts back and forth within the tale so often, pieces that were seemingly key to the mystery fall by the wayside, including characters and their arcs. Now, the show is very ambitious, which I think is also its downfall. Now, there's nothing wrong with making a complex storyline, but when we have things going on over here and then over here, but the central points have all been neglected, the whole thing falls apart and it becomes very messy, which then breaks the suspense and even can kill the interest within the mystery. There's this kid named Martin, and at one point he feels like he could be a pivotal piece to the story, but then the elements that he's involved with aren't mentioned or even seen for multiple episodes, only to return close to the finale. I mean, it's unsatisfying and really just poor storytelling. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm completely down on this entire series and that there is absolutely nothing I liked. Now, some of the special effects and the graphics in this look pretty good. There are some lighting effects that are key to experiences, and I think they look convincing, especially with how fragile and fleeting they come across. This matches what we're told about what's going on, so the consistency is nice to have. Now, there are also some things, which I know is incredibly vague, but it's necessary to not outright spoil things, but these things appear jittery and jagged. And while these could be just the result of terrible CGI, the look matches the characteristics of these things within the story's lore absolutely perfectly. And a lot of the imagery in this is similar to what you'd expect to see in like a half-awake nightmare, where imagery is blurry and ill-defined, creating a creepy vibe and then bathing it all in uncertainty. Now, I had mentioned that there's a lot of angst within the series, and the actors capture this sentiment pretty effectively, creating a lot of tension and turmoil between themselves. The series even starts off by creating some vague suspense and unease simply by putting us in a room with a whole bunch of teenagers playing a game where unsaid words are clearly irritating some. This drama then continues in different ways throughout the show, giving us characters that endure unrequited love, betrayal, manipulation, even sometimes love. And while the actors can pull these off convincingly, I think there's just too much going on in the story that pulls the focus away from the central narrative. We spend too much time and effort on tangents rather than having small tangents present that then can provide some additional insight into what's going on in a particular scene or even a character mindset. Now, there's a very engaging and dark storyline at the center that I think is incredibly interesting, but it's surrounded and distracted by a bunch of competing storylines that aren't nearly as captivating or even satisfying. mean, had this show chosen to stick firmly to the supernatural mystery angle and then let it play out in creepy ways for the characters, this really could have been riveting and memorable. But instead, the storytelling focuses on anything and everything in an attempt to create a more robust tale. Now, they accomplished the robust part, but it's now broken and unenjoyable. And after all that and the large amount of time invested to watch, we get to the end that's not really an end. The last few episodes were building some intensity and even urgency, and because they had regained focus on the central lore, I was getting invested again in what was playing out. We were finally on track to fully dive into the mythology, and then the screen fades to black. Awesome! While I had felt like I had wasted some of my time within the repetitious and extraneous portions in the middle of the show, after that screen went to black, I was absolutely certain I had wasted my time. I mean, talk about a letdown and a huge disservice to the audience. Here, as a reward for sitting through 9 episodes of this convoluted story, you get 0 resolutions. Thanks. So overall, The Girl in the Mirror had a lot of potential to present a supernatural story with mystery and intrigue. Some of those elements were present, but they were all negated through repetitive story elements, forgotten central plot lines, and an ending designed to irritate and cheat. And even though I enjoyed some of the acting and I loved what was being introduced with the lore, the lack of cohesive storytelling and the disregard for the audience's time investment reduced this from something that I was enjoying to something that was an absolute complete turnoff. There's sex, nudity, a bunch of profanity, and some very gruesome violence. I give The Girl in the Mirror 1.5 out of 5 couches. So what are some good supernatural thrillers or mysteries that you enjoy? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.